Thank you for joining us this evening. I know we're just coming off such an extreme cold spell, so I do appreciate everyone kind of venturing out from their warm, toasty homes and joining us here for what I think is a pretty important conversation about libraries in our communities. So my name is Judith Barasuk. I'm the Executive Director for the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District. We, along with the Chamber of Commerce, Tony Plater is not here, and the Regina Warehouse Business Improvement District, Lisa Gibbons is the Executive Director there. The three of us have worked together over this past year to try to build a city building speaker series. So this is our third iteration. We hope to continue having these throughout 2024 and bringing speakers into our community to kind of share their experiences in their own communities, and hopefully we'll have some learned lessons as we navigate the growth of our community here. So before I get into introductions, we'll start promptly at 5:45, so check. Washrooms are just outside the doors to the right or left. I believe our speakers will be speaking for about 45 minutes, and then we'll go into a moderated Q&A where I'll ask them to join us on stage along with our question moderator, Leanne Croft, and we'll have some questions for them, and then we'll also take questions from the audience. So if you have questions that come up over the course of the presentation, or if you have some in your back pocket, you can hang on to them and we'll hopefully get to them once we hit that time in the schedule. So today we have brought in two speakers that have a lot of experience, bringing in experience from the City of Edmonton and the Edmonton Public Library. Let's see, we typically bring in speakers who have experience and insight into how cities can maintain and build vibrancy and prosperity in our downtown cores, and the importance of public and private investment in civic institutions. So with us today, Pilar Martinez is the CEO of the Edmonton Public Libraries, and Carl Belanger is the city architect for the City of Edmonton. They're going to share their successes and lessons learned in expanding the EPL system and the importance of libraries in their community and the results that they're seeing there. As I mentioned, Pilar is CEO of the award-winning Edmonton Public Library, where she has championed numerous innovative services, including community-led and digital initiatives. She's led significant capital projects. Pilar has a broad base of experience in executive leadership, including advocacy, strategic planning, and change leadership. She is passionate about the difference public libraries make and is highly engaged within her community, serving on several boards in Canada and in the United States. Carol Belanger is the city architect for the City of Edmonton. He graduated from the Technical University of Nova Scotia with a master's in architecture. After 15 years in private practice, he worked as a senior urban designer with the city's Planning and Development Group, where he chaired the Edmonton Urban Design Awards in 2005 and in 2007. In 2007, Carl moved over to the city's building group as project architect, and in 2009 took over as the city architect. In this role, he has worked to emphasize the importance of urban and architectural design excellence for the betterment of the city and the communities that we live in. Leveraging the city's current policies and bylaws, the City of Edmonton has revised its RFP process to reflect the required higher design standard. In 2017, Carl was inducted to the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada's College of Fellows for his continued advocacy of the architectural profession, and in 2023, he received the RAIC Advocate for Architecture Gold Medal. So we are in great company here tonight, and it is my pleasure to invite Pilar and Carl up to the stage where they can talk to us about accepting no more crap.
Thank you so much, Judith, and thank you everybody for having us this evening, and what a great turnout. I'm very impressed in this frigid weather that folks are coming out to hear us speak. So we are going to talk about, as Judith mentioned, our experience with revitalizing our main downtown branch, along with some of the other capital projects that Edmonton has undertaken. There has been some roller coaster moments, and in many ways there are times we've thought this is a way it's not to do a project, as much as it does represent a good ending and a way to build a case for a capital project. So, just some history before we dive in. EPL was established in 1913 and has grown over time to become one of leading urban library systems like Regina Public Library, and really recognized for our commitment to that community-led customer engagement, community engagement, and those innovative partnerships and programming. And today we have 21 locations and 4 literacy vans that serve the population of Edmonton. And this is a photograph of the original library, the Centennial Library that was eventually renamed. In 1967, we opened the doors to the public, and initially, as I mentioned, known as the Centennial Library. It was designed by Norwegian-Canadian Fred Minsos and reflected the brutalist architecture of its day. In 1996, the branch was renamed in honor of one of our champions, Dr. Stanley A. Milner. He was a library champion, and he was a true advocate and a former chair and counselor. And his contributions have been really essential to the library's construction. In the 90s, EPL did not have strong support from its municipality in comparison to other Canadian urban library folks, and we had lower per capita operating funding. Decades went by where very little investment was made in infrastructure. And not only was EPL unable to build new branches in growing areas of the city, but existing infrastructure was in deteriorating condition. And I'll pass it on to Carl. Carl and I are going to be tag teaming this one.
Sorry, that period of time was also known as the pothole filling time, because that's all we did is fill potholes and no buildings anyways. So yeah, so EPL was not alone in experiencing a lack of financial support. There was a drought in all public infrastructure during the 1990s, and what was built was not attractive. And I sort of joked, I said, thank God there wasn't more money because we just had more ugly stuff done. Anyways, and so, and in 2005, we had Mayor Mandel, who famously said, "The time has passed when square boxes with minimal features and lame landscaping are acceptable. Our tolerance for craft is now 0." And people went bananas when they heard that, like in terms of, you know, I mean, in terms of invigorating people. And I took him to his word. And so part of that actually started spilling into looking at policies to make the city better at the time. I didn't put the slide in. And then I came along. I got so many, you know, so many people angry, but I sort of go, my name's Carol, bring it on, man. I've heard it all. Anyway, so basically I came along as the city architect, and so a lot of it was taking, you know, like these amazing client groups that we have, especially EPL, and really taking the money they had, the little money they had, and bringing every cent out of it and making all the infrastructure amazing. Because really, they deserve to be working in the best places, and their patrons need to be in the best places as well. So really, I know, and I'm not going to go into this too far, the key is procurement, because whoever controls procurement controls the quality of what you end up getting, right? And so what we did is, at that time, there was a new free trade agreement that came into play between Alberta and BC, and it meant that everything over $75,000 worth of fees, which is not a very high threshold, had to be publicly tendered, which meant then, in the past, we would only be doing this by invitation. So I jokingly say, if you only invite 4 lame horses to the race, who's going to win? A lame horse. They don't even have to cross the line. But in this case, because we were going out to the public, we didn't know what we were going to get. So really, at that point, then we looked at creating an RFQ and RFP process that was reflective of the new city policies. So in those new policies, we had sustainable building policy. We also had the Edmonton Design Committee, which all city buildings had to go to and present to. Again, that was to raise the level of design. And then we also had Percent for Art as well. The other thing that was revolutionary that we did is we actually pegged the fees to the fee guideline that the Association of Architects put out, so that in the end, if you, it's a whole big chart that talks about the types of buildings, i.e. like libraries and hospitals, and they have a higher code, and same thing with the value of the building. So it's a big chart. And so with that chart, you know exactly what the fees should be. And so we would publish that to the consulting industry. And so in the end, if they gave us the fee within 5%, they got the full points. If they were 5% above or below, they lost a point. 10% above or below, they lost 2, and so on and so forth. And so in the end, from a city's point of view, we weren't going to let people buy the job and then give us crap service. And we weren't going to, obviously, because we're a city, not pay exorbitant fees either, right? And then the other thing that we also established was a standing arrangement where we could actually have a list of smaller firms and larger firms to do emergent work for us. So that allowed smaller firms that are just getting established to understand how cities work and how to work with them. So in terms of my role, I sort of laugh. I'm the only city architect in Canada. I would love to franchise this position to other cities, believe me. Really what we do is we lead procurement for the architectural services. So I see myself as a knowledgeable buyer and curator for the city. And so I sort of think that every city should have somebody like myself. We liaise with the industry, so we talk to the architects and contractors. We advocate for architecture and design excellence. We support our project teams, and we also support our partner groups in making sure that they get the best and they're supported through the whole process. We also act as stewards to our building portfolio. So with that, we have a lot of older buildings that a lot of bad things have happened to. And so we go back and try to repair that work and bring buildings back to their glory days. And we also are a city-wide architectural resource for all different departments. So another thing that we did too is that the city went to a 4-year budget cycle that really helped us be able to start getting adequate budgets. So we started doing programming, making sure that we were getting the right size building, and then doing figuring out what the budgets should be, adding all the soft costs so that we were going to council. Even if they reduced us by 10%, we were still within the target. So we weren't having to come back to council repeatedly. We had a supportive council, supportive management, and then one of the biggest thing is we were really looking for best value for the citizens. It's like, if you're going to do it right. I don't want you know what I mean? Like I take it very personally that I'm entrusted with this money to make sure that we're going to get the best for the citizens. And in my mind, beauty equals sustainability. Because if a building's beautiful and inspires people, they want to keep it, they want to maintain it, and it becomes the heritage of the future.
So in addition to that context, EPL was also very strategic in advocating for support and improving our library system. That meant frequent meetings with City Council to understand, what did the citizens need? How could EPL support them in helping their constituents? Improving key messages and how EPL was adding value to the City of Edmonton, ensuring that budget requests were fair and reasonable. So not asking for 500 when we only needed 250, for example, using key performance indicators and comparing with other leading libraries. And also would go back, that our pattern was to ask, and when we got our budget requests, go back to council after the budget cycle was completed and talk about how we delivered on our promise and made good use of those tax dollars. So I think that meant, and that took several decades to convince council and get that support, but that truly built strong credibility and respect. And so over many years, I think this has led to that exceptional support of City Council and that credibility and pride. When we won Library of the Year, we still are the only library outside of the United States that has won Library of the Year. When we won that award, we made sure that we recognized council in celebrating that award, so they saw themselves as being a contributor to our success. So I think we've done really well in raising our profile and communicating our value. And this same mayor that said no more crap described EPL as a brain factory. So really believing in the library as a significant catalyst for learning and growth and community building. Oops. So a 2008 capital budget presentation resulted in council approving $100 million, which was amazing for 6 building projects. And now I'll pass it to Carl, who will describe them.
So Jasper Place Library was one of the first libraries that came through our new procurement model. So what was good, again, from what Pilar was saying, is we were then, budget cycle was every 4 years, so in this cycle we actually had 3 libraries. So we went out for an RFQ for the 3 libraries, which got a lot of interest from across Canada. And that we had some, like, it made it more attractive for people to submit because they knew they had a chance for 3 libraries, right? One of 3. So Jasper Place was designed by Dub Architects, was HCMA. They had done a major library in Vancouver, and so they teamed up with Dub locally. And so this library, again, pretty amazing piece of work. Like structurally, it's basically this shell that sort of hovers over a landscape of a library inside. And again, lots of natural light. The tree at the front was sort of built around that tree as well. The curious thing is on the inside it's it's architectural concrete. So there's a senior center across the street, and periodically I guess they keep coming in and saying the building's not finished because we need to paint the concrete, but it's not going to get finished. They're not happy, but anyway. So that was our first library. And again, when you go to these libraries, people don't get the libraries. We see as super important because they're that third place that people are going to now that is truly public. And when they go to these buildings, like I said, I call it, they're like the church of the secular. It's where people go. It's like their church. They go there, and so when you go there, it's people from all walks of life. You have like kids, you have contractors, you have all kinds of people there. So it's pretty amazing. This next library was the Highlands Library, designed by Schmidt Hammer-Lawson with Marshall Tiddamore Architects. Schmidt Hammer-Lawson actually were designing the Halifax Library, and so they teamed it up to do this library. They figured, Halifax to Edmonton, that's a quick flight. It was probably cheaper for them to fly back to Denmark and fly back to Edmonton than it was to fly between the 2 countries. But anyway, so this was supposed to only be an addition renovation. But it turned into a whole new building, and I remember sitting next to Linda at the time because they kept doing the exuberant shape and really expensive finishes, and I'm like, we can't afford this, we can't afford it. And she kept kicking me into the table. But anyway, so this is what we got. It looks pretty amazing. So it's again, it has tons of windows at the main floor, so you really see the activity of what's happening in the library. All of these libraries are all were all designed to LEED Silver. That's leadership in energy and environmental design. So they're all like high efficient buildings. This library here, Clairview, this is our first library that we did in Edmonton that was actually incorporated in with a rec center. So basically the library ended up occupying the most important part of the building. It's the tallest, it's almost like the prow of the ship. And it was funny because at the time, EPL wasn't totally bought into this. There was a real fear because our rec centers back in the day were pretty hideous, right? And so they thought, Linda said, I don't want to be the tire department on the side of a Costco. I want to have a nice library, an architectural library. And they actually had a piece of land just around the corner from here. And if they didn't like the way the design was going, they were ready to hit the eject button and then be out of there. But, they kept coming to the table, and they moved the site further back into the site. And I know EPL was sort of worried. They wanted to be really front and center, but in the end, this was like at the very prow of the boat, and it's an amazing. It's the highest part of the building. So again, amazing library. And from that, we ended up doing more libraries within the rec centers. So this is the second one that we did, and this is Meadows Library, designed by Group 2 in Short Tilby. And in this case, the library almost was treated like a pavilion in front of the rec center. It has a fully green roof on top of it. And again, it's like it's a pavilion with a nice fireplace in the corner, and it actually forms part of the courtyard going into the rec center. So again, a very successful project. And now, I guess, every time we do a rec center, we always phone EPL right away, and they go, yes, we're in, you know. So we're doing another one now, Lewis Farms, way out in the west end of the city, and that's under construction now. They actually started to do the foundation, so EPL is going to have a branch in there as well. So. And then Mill Woods, this is an interesting one, because these meetings were bizarre. So Mill Woods, with Dub and HCMA, so they did Jasper Place. Council decided at the last minute, let's throw a senior center, you know, as part of this library, but we'll fund them at way less per dollar per square foot than the library. And I'm like, and at the time we were like, do we build like a really expensive looking library next to a really inexpensive senior center? That's not going to look really good. So what ended up happening here is the library actually envelops in senior center, and the senior center is sort of tucked in on the second floor, looking down. So anyway, so pretty interesting. And again, you get these really high spots, leading areas in the corner. Again, very dynamic. And again, we started out with meetings with the seniors and the library, but we had to split them up. They kept fighting. It was funny. The senior center kept commenting on the library design. They were like, "We don't want to hear your opinion. It's our building." But you know what? And it didn't stop at 100 million. After that, there were more libraries. So after that, there was another set of libraries. So this is Calder Library, designed by Atelier Tag and MBAC. And this building is just amazing. It's beautiful. It's almost like a little flower sitting in a park. It has, and the architects have done a lot of research to talk about Calder was sort of like a railway town. It was where all the rail workers lived. And so at the time, their library used to be in a rail car, and it would pull up, and the whole thing was lined in books. And so they tried to make they made these branches so that it was almost like a grand trunk. And it was pretty beautiful library. And again, the next one is Capilano Library, and this is by Group 2 and Cow Architects. Amazing building, like the natural light and the warmth of the wood. This is built along one of Edmonton's many ravines. Again, lots of natural light coming in, and the views in. And what was amazing is that now you have a place that anybody of any capability, wheelchair or whatever, can actually see into the ravine 4 seasons, right? So you get to see snow falling in the ravine. This building actually graced the cover of an Italian design magazine. So yes, Edmonton in Italy. It was. I was like, I had that magazine sitting at home. It was a pretty proud moment. And it's, again, all these libraries have won loads of national and international awards. So it's, again, we don't do it for the awards, but it's definitely the proof in the pudding that these buildings are, you know, really important to the citizens. And in terms of the social media on these buildings, it's pretty amazing. And then we come to Mayor Mandel. He sits right here. And his view is straight across to the library. So anyway, so he didn't like his view, anyways, and so we heard about it, anyways. So at the time, it's one of them. Okay, so around around Churchill Square. So around Churchill Square, there's quite a few important cultural buildings. So at the bottom here, we had the new Edmonton or Alberta Art Gallery. So that was actually a design competition, international design competition, and that was happening at the same time that the mayor had said no crap architecture. So people really interested about design. I remember going to all the talks and the presentations by all the different groups. So that's located on Churchill Square. We have the Citadel Theatre. This is one of it's a building from the 70s, but it's a seminal piece of architecture by Barton Myers. And then we have the Winspear Theatre, which was a fairly new building. And so then all those buildings, including City Hall, are all on the square. And then you have this at the other end. And so it was also dubbed at one point, I remember, the Ugly Sister or something like that they had talked about, anyways. And then I remember, and I laugh at this because I was flicking through the TV, just wanting to see what was on. And I came across Craig Ferguson, who's a Scottish comedian. And he was doing his monologue at the beginning of the show. And he's standing in front of a picture of Milner. And I'm like, what's going on, right? And so he's talking about how he came to Edmonton to do a comedy show. And he couldn't believe it. He saw this like prison in the downtown, and it turns out it was their library. And so, I mean, it's sort of, but that's the thing, it was a brutalist building. And so really, when you look at this building, though, all these, what looked like gun slots were between stacks, right? So the whole idea was that it was all about protecting books, but it really wasn't about allowing views in and out, right? And so the building, in the end, it really wasn't representing the values that EPL had held near and dear to them. And so it was really time for it to be renovated.
Thank you, Carl. So the downtown library was really seen, and even the mayor saw it that way, as the heart of EPL and really the downtown core. And as an institution that received over 1.2 million visits each year, Edmontonians with different backgrounds, all different backgrounds, with a variety of interests, were using this space. So incredible. So the role of libraries, as Carl mentioned, has changed considerably since the 1960s, from being places where mostly books were held, and that was the primary core reason, to a modern role as technologically advanced, still very much about books. We need to celebrate books. Also about many other things, as community hubs, as community connectors. So, as we embarked upon the second century in 2013, that need to refresh and revitalize that 67 building became very much a civic priority. So in 2011, we went to City Council to request funding for the renewal of just the exterior facade and some mechanical upgrades. So Council approved $1 million, just over $1 million in schematic design funding for what was positioned originally as a recladding project. So again, mostly about the exterior, making it look nice on the outside. A design competition ensued, and Stephen Teeple Architects and ATB, the same folks who designed the Clairview Recreation Center and Public Library, were selected. Oops. Sorry. So I think it wasn't, however, only in need of exterior renovations and some mechanical electrical upgrades. Those things would have definitely been impacted by an exterior only, but it had significant interior issues. There was asbestos, other hazardous materials. It didn't meet building code. It was literally leaking energy, and most of all, it was not meeting the needs of a 21st century library user. So there was a bit of tension arose with our board and with the senior leadership team, because we were very, very grateful for the considerable funding that we've received for these other branches, and also had a concern about not asking for too much more, being fair in terms of being a civic sort of funded institution and not being conservative that way. How could we prioritize a downtown branch over other areas of the city that may not even have a branch? So, and then thinking, how are customers going to benefit from only exterior recladding and building that looked nice on the exterior but didn't improve space on the interior? So there was a lot of conversations and discussions that took place, and thinking, how can we possibly just sell to our customers a cosmetic exterior renovation that just wouldn't fly? Carl said this every meeting, I swear.
Well, that's what it was looking like for a while there, because we had our mayor didn't want to spend very much money, and he only really cared about the north facades. At one point, he had talked to one architect who said, "Oh, you could renovate the whole building for $12 million." And being very shrewd, he goes, "I only care about the north side. Divide that by 4. Okay, so you could do it for 2.5." And I'm like, "I'm not touching that building for 2.5 on the whole facade." You'll see some schemes that were 2.5. We're like, no way, we're not doing this. But anyway, so many discussions. We said we're not putting lipstick on a pig, but here are some of the ones. So this one here and this one here, we're just looking at sort of just doing some weird. Well, it's funny because that reminds me of the cathedral, the popcorn screen in the cathedral here in Regina. It was a while ago anyways, but that's sort of what this looked like. You had these pieces in front of the building that were lit up anyways. And so these are sort of schemes that we're looking at. So then we took that money with the consultants and we started figuring out what we could do from a design. So the building, obviously, it morphed because we were looking at, quite different elaborate designs to the building, and council approved then at the time 62.5 million with a 10 million contribution. And again, this is based on a curtain wall concept with minimal interior renovation. So we had gone ahead with this amount of money, and I remember at the time, because I had argued at the time that we should be doing a functional program and to figure out what we needed to do in the building before we figured out what we were going to do with the exterior. And it sort of came back to bite us, because all of a sudden we had a look of a building, but it was like, it's like deciding you're going to wear tennis clothes and figure out you're going to go to a concert hall. You need to know what you want to do in the building before you decide how you're going to clad the building. So yeah, so then we hired a project or a functional programmer to start putting the building together.
So there were challenges because of how the project evolved, initially as an exterior facade to a complete interior and exterior renovation and modernization. We'd spent almost no time on the interior, as Carl said. We had done no community consultation, there was no functional program, the budget was exceptionally tight, and I would even say probably not accurate. Would you agree? Yeah. Costing was based on that hybrid exterior only and minor interior renewal, so it wasn't as comprehensive as it needed to be. And then finally, while EPL had done fundraising, we had never done a significant capital campaign for $10 million. So we had some challenges. However, we had some catching up to do, and we went ahead and with great guns. We did a lot in just an 8-month period before proceeding to detailed design. So in the summer of 2015, we embarked on a community consultation process to gather feedback from our customers, our users, and stakeholders on what they wanted to see in their downtown library. And the responses from those conversations informed the creation of the What We Heard report and the Milner Redesign Consultant findings. So what we consulted again with a range of stakeholders and gathered feedback from various groups, our staff of course, customers, partners, non-library users, and did deeper engagement with Indigenous communities. And overwhelmingly what we heard was that people were looking to EPL as a place to spend time. People wanted EPL to be a destination, a place to connect, a place to feel part of something bigger than themselves. So that really, you see some of the quotes, and I love that one. For many, the library seems the opposite of loneliness. So even when you're in a library by yourself, you feel a connection, and it helps with that social isolation. So overall, the consultations that we did with Indigenous communities echoed what we had the feedback that we had from other folks. They were of course involved in that original consultation as well. There were some features though that the Indigenous communities wanted particularly. They wanted to be able to see themselves in our spaces, to be able to feel welcome and a sense of belonging. So things like displays, things like Indigenous art, celebration of heritage to be practiced, and support for local Indigenous artists and craftspeople, and opportunities to practice Indigenous languages and learn Indigenous languages, and conduct ceremony in our spaces. So we had a roadmap, and the top interests as a result of that were identified, and then we initiated a complete functional program, which really helped position us for a detailed design. So we did things a little bit backwards, but we got there. And these are the top areas of interest that were identified through the community consultation. And I think the consultation didn't end with just asking folks what they wanted to see in the library. We continued that while we were renovating, when we closed, to ensure that really community were engaged and felt a part of the whole process. So we engaged communities when we closed the library with a project that we called the Graffiti Party at Milner. So when we closed in 2016, we had to close the library while they undertook construction, and for both staff and customers in December. And it was incredible, the number of folks who came out. Over 4,000 folks came out to really articulate what the library meant with them. Kids painting, using felts, artists poetry, you name it, and again, signifying what the library meant to them. And I love that quote in the bottom, "Bless the library, the best public institution today." So it gives me goosebumps. And then another example of engagement further throughout the project was a behind-the-scenes tour about 3/4 of the way through the project, when we had a media tour, and we wanted to also celebrate our birthday and did a time capsule. So, and which actually is installed in a part of the wall in the Milner Library to be able to celebrate folks' fond remembrances of the library. And we had things like a blueprint from the old Central Library from 1922, actually the Carnegie Library, a land title document from 1916, an original brick from one of our branch libraries, our first branch library that we ever built, and many heartfelt handwritten letters. So there is, I mentioned, a peephole in the drywall just before you enter the children's library that houses this time capsule. So again, just illustrating that engagement was key to the success of the project.
So back to Milner. Anyway, so the view from the exterior. So again, these were the views again of refined building exteriors. Again, taking into account the interior being involved. But again, with this, it still proved to be too much money. So again, this was an example that looked at like almost like a stretched elastic. Again, it made it very fluid. But again, this option was proved to be too expensive. So then we had to refine it yet again. And again, this is, how to put this, I cannot explain how important having a great architect is. When you have hardly no money, this is where a talented architect can sing, because they have to do something, pretty amazing with very little money. So this is, in the end, the exterior that we ended up with the building. So again, very happy about it. Like, the building actually stretches out to the corner, tons of windows, lots of see-through windows on the main floor, and again, with a very high-efficient exterior envelope. And this is a picture during the construction. Sorry, do I talk about all the social media stuff that happened?
No, that's
You can do that. That was horrible. We had to do so many public interviews that week. Really hell. Anyway, so the building in the end, though, this building reflects EPL's values and about sharing, innovation, and customer focus. And so when you look at this building, it's really the building looked at interconnecting the floors, so they actually saw what was happening from floor to floor. The old library we used to call it a stack of pancakes. So you didn't know what was happening from floor to floor. It was just very stagnated between the floors. You had a direct connection down the LRT through the basement. You had more accessible public ground floor. At the time, the old Milner, the only great access into the building was at the second cut. You literally only had 6 feet wide of the whole building perimeter where you could just go in with a stroller or a wheelchair or anything. And this one actually had all kinds of entrances now all around the building, and including off the park at the back. And again, it also stretched out to the corners. You had way larger windows in the building. You had really amazing views. So it actually tried to connect the building to all the other civic buildings around Churchill Square. And here you can also see that those interconnected floors. The other really important thing in this library is that it's called the wall. So if you get a chance, please come and see it. And this is something that Pilar had come across when she was at Queensland University in Australia. And it was a multi-touch screen, and it was extended over 2 stories. And this is something that facilitated or had an opportunity for people the public to discover what was happening in the library. And so there was a team that they're working between themselves and Queensland University to create more content for these screens. And again, you can see here the light streaming through. They had put in the skylights, the EPL colors. But again, you can see the facade. This area here is the old building. So again, all that concrete came off. way more windows in that wall overlooking the 5-story atrium. And then you even have an opening down into the basement as well, so you can see right down in the basement. It used to be just like this dog-leg stair going to the bottom where you had this amazing theater that nobody knew about. But now you have this amazing space and you can see down into it. And this is looking from above. And there's a large reading ramp that you come around, so you can, that goes around this wall. And then again, you can see down into the stairs as well. So you get this multi-level experience where you can see what was happening from all floors. So and again, it helped people sort of navigate the library from floor to floor without taking an elevator every time, right? So this way they could get from floor to floor. And then on the third floor, you have the large, you can't really see from there. Oh yes, there it is the large public art piece. So this is the percent for art that was part of this renovation. So again, amazing amount of light. The library, the stacks are all fairly low. Again, you have really good views throughout. And this created at the very end here this large civic space, reading room that people can overlook the square and get lots of natural light.
Thank you, Carl. So this is the Shelley Milner Children's Library, and as before, this library is located on the main floor of the building, and in its renewed state, the Children's Library is almost tripled in size. It now features all kinds of cool technology, robots, and opportunities for folks to learn about science, technology, engineering, art, and math activities, coding, digital creation. There's an indoor play area. There's lots more resources and more opportunities for caregivers and their children to connect and grow and learn. This is the interior of the space, so it's now 13,000 square feet, and really there's a lot of opportunity for kids to foster that sense of independence, and there's hiding spots and loft spaces for them to play in, and lots of spaces for programming and early literacy classes. And then we've got a specific space for a makerspace just for kids. We had a makerspace in our former iteration of Milner and would often have to close when we had school tours. So this meant having two separate spaces meant that we'd be more accessible to folks. So there's a green screen in there. There's a DJ booth so kids can practice making music and recording for kids of all ages. This is an initiative that we're very proud of, the Indigenous Gathering Space. The name Piasuaskaigan is Nihayuan for Thunderbird. And Thunderbirds are really an important deity for those of you who may not be aware, for the Plains Cree people, and have a significant relationship with the buffalo, who sustained that life for the prairie indigenous people for thousands of years. So the name was gifted to the space for our elders, Jerry and Joanne Saddleback, in a pipe ceremony. So this is a space that's very heavily used by community, and where our indigenous elder in residence teaches folks. She does classes, she meets with people and conducts ceremony. And this is a game where we felt like we've really met the interests expressed when we did that engagement with community, to be able to offer that opportunity for folks to smudge. They can conduct a pipe ceremony and have a quiet space to reflect. This is a photo of our gamer space. We had huge demand for gaming in the former Milner, and now we have a special area that people can learn about gaming and play gaming. It brings folks who may not necessarily use the library for other things, and then they end up exploring other facets and borrowing materials and coming to programs and various gaming platforms and video games where communities can connect. And there is a lot of literacy and learning involved in gaming. This is a photo of the exterior of our makerspace. This space too grew about 3 times as large as it was in its former iteration. We have all kinds of technology for people to use. We have spaces for podcasting or recording music. We have a fellow who comes and practices his bagpipes because he lives in a condo, and he probably wouldn't be a welcome neighbor if he practiced his bagpipes in his condo. People produce videos, and there's robots in this space, 3D printing, and then we've got laser cutting and soldering services as well. And this on the corner right here is a computer lab where we can provide digital literacy classes for folks wanting to learn more about how to use computers and technology. This is our kitchen space, and this too came out from community consultation. Folks wanted a commercial kitchen in the downtown public library. And it really was a way to create those learning opportunities for increased knowledge around food literacy, nutrition, to teach skills that could be transferable in a kitchen environment. So there's a variety of cooking and baking and food related courses that we offer, knife cutting skills to how to make a souffle, and they're affordable, they're cost recovery, so we're meeting an interest that for folks who can't afford to go to those other classes offered by more for-profit folks. And we liaise and partner with a number of different partners. There are different workstations. Those stainless steel units are workstations, and we have a commercial oven, there's induction cooktops, and it's heavily used. The classes are they're oversubscribed. So this is a photo of folks who are taking cooking lessons, and they are Indigenous folks from Northern Alberta, and it is a collaboration with Indigenous Canada Services along with some dietitians from the federal government, and it really is helping support them create meals with limited resources. So what's in their pantry, because they may in Northern Alberta not always have access to those fresh fruits and vegetables, and so how to make a soup that you can stretch out in different, adding different ingredients to make meals for a week type thing. And it's been very well received and very popular. We also partner with a local college that serves a lot of new Canadians, and they come and make meals from their country of origin, and then they have to explain how to prepare the meal, so they're practicing their English language skills. So great ways to engage, and food is a great connector. So we've highlighted some of the main spaces. We also have tenant space on the 6th floor that we rent out, maintaining our commitment that we made to council decades ago to provide that affordable lease space downtown for different organizations, and particularly ones that align with our mandate and mission. And then we also have a lot of community meeting spaces, which there is a shortage of in our city. So they are constantly in use by nonprofits. The city of Edmonton is a big user of our meeting spaces as well. Overall, we increased our square footage at Milner by just 15,000 square feet with the openings that were cut in the floor plates to increase that vertical access and visibility that impacted how much square footage, but we're very happy with the space that we have.
The next slide. So basically, with this building, again, considering we were starting with ripping everything apart and then starting with the framework of the building, we ended up getting LEED Silver certification for the revitalized Milner Library. We reused about 60% of the existing structure. 90% of the construction waste was recycled or diverted from the landfill. All the new energy efficient lighting systems and HVAC. LED lighting systems installed in the public spaces and office spaces. The building control installed throughout the facility to manage the heating system. The floor plan was designed to provide adaptive and versatility to the spaces. So again, that's something that's important. Low emitting materials were used throughout the facility. So flooring, the wood, adhesives and sealants. Again, wanting to create a healthy environment, you know. The zinc exterior is high reflective to reduce the heat island effect. It sort of has a white coating to it. And then again, balancing the heat recovery systems as well. So yeah, so again, quite a bit went into this building to get it to LEED Silver. And again, it's all about creating that, not just an efficient building, but a healthy building for the people that work in it and the people who have to use it. The other thing too that's we sort of wanted, I don't necessarily compare to Calgary, so this is Calgary's library. So across Canada and around the world, we're seeing a major renaissance of central urban libraries. It started with Montreal creating their national library downtown, then Halifax built their library. Calgary's built their library. Winnipeg had done a major addition to their library, the Pack House. did that. Toronto had done a major renovation to theirs as well. Saskatoon's in the planning of doing a library. Edmonton did their library. So again, Ottawa is under construction, and of course Vancouver, I forget, because it was one of the first ones, the Coliseum, that building sort of started it all off. So really, and that's not just just in Canada, but across around the world. You have like Denmark, Austin, Texas, you have Perth, Sweden, Helsinki, and Qatar. Like all over the world, libraries are being developed, and obviously the importance of libraries are, they're definitely, it's very important.
So we wanted to highlight a bit about the impact of libraries. So this is a study that Edmonton Public Library commissioned in 2016 by a group called Nordicity, a third-party consultant group that did Toronto's. And for every dollar that is invested in EPL, that generates $3.11 in value. So we bring good value for pretty minimal investment, and we are saving folks over $100 a year with their usage of the library. And this is just the economic value. This doesn't speak to the social value that libraries bring. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with a recent report that was released by the Canadian Urban Institute. Anybody familiar with this report? Jeff's nodding, of course. And I think that is critical to highlight in this discussion, that investing in public libraries is money well spent. This is recent research that was conducted by the Canadian Urban Institute for the report Overdue, and it calculated that for every dollar invested in Canada's urban libraries, $6 is generated in community economic impact and social benefits. And that's even more significant when you consider the broader societal impacts that libraries make towards literacy, education, culture, health, and that vibrant democracy. And I wanted to just highlight the growing visits that we're experiencing since we opened the Milner Library. We are not really operating, I think, in a world that is realistic pre-COVID. So we are still feeling the impact of COVID, which has, I think, meant the recovery is slower. But since we resumed regular hours in the fall of 2021, we've seen a dramatic increase with over a 27% increase over 2022 and 2023. So we are getting closer to our closure visits, and of course Milner is really very much a destination. The LRT just opened, and we're hearing folks who are just jumping on the LRT from the south and coming with their families. So it really is, we're seeing a much increased space, and it really is the most visited space downtown. So we can't leave you without talking more about the challenges that we face. So we did have some unexpected issues. Reluctantly in 2016, we had to go back to council for an additional funding request for higher than expected needed hazardous abatement, demolition, and mechanical costs. So there was a shortfall of $6.5 million. And then again, the following year, just after we closed, it was determined that additional structure was required on the lower level, requiring unplanned demolition and abatement of the lower level. So we had to get additional funding for that. And in both cases, while we did receive significant dollars from the city, EPL also came to the table with savings that we had from capital projects. So in both situations, there was unanimous support from council. But it's just no fun going back twice to ask for additional money. Some of the things that we did to mitigate, because we knew all along that the budget was not adequate and that we had to mitigate those risks. So we were strategic. The year before we closed the library for construction, we implemented a hiring freeze because we knew we'd have, many staff, 100 staff that would need somewhere else to go. We were in a much smaller temporary space while we were under construction. So we undertook a hiring freeze so we would redeploy those folks to the other branches while we were under construction. We were very strategic in advocating for provincial and federal government support to help us with the funding gap that we had. And we also rallied our fundraising campaign, identifying champions to help us. We also scaled back on our programming. So we shelved spaces for the Culinary Center, the Black Box Studios, and the kitchen, just so we could complete the project with the funding that we had. And we couldn't necessarily finish the whole 6th floor. And I think we also undertook a costing exercise, actually several times throughout the project. Our capital campaign, Carl mentioned that we had originally committed to council that we would commit $10 million through community partners. We almost doubled that goal, and we raised $18.1 million. So very proud of that effort, and the vast majority of those donations came from our regular Edmontonians. So $100, $500, it wasn't the millions of dollars. So I think that speaks a lot to how folks really wanted to see themselves in the library and give back. The other challenge that we had was what we called was Twittergate, which was in July of 2019. There was, it said that beauty is in the eye of the beholder unless you're on the internet, and then everything is just ugly and terrible. So in July of 2019, there was a tweet that posted an unfortunate photo of the library under construction that went viral. And people were very critical. We had a barrage of tweets. People compared it to a tank, a cruise ship, a shipping container, even a bomb shelter. And we just took deep breaths, and this was our response. We read all your tweets, and our very humorous approach and non-defensive approach really helped. It led to interviews on every major media outlet in Edmonton, and the coverage was picked up by the National News, the Beaverton, the National Post, the National, and even on BBC News. And actually, in the end, silver lining led to renewed interest in the project. The other challenge was we had, grand plans for an amazing grand opening and a celebration, and well, we opened in September of 2020. What was happening in September of 2020? COVID. So like everybody else, we had to adjust, and to facilitate the grand opening, we had to have in-person limitations, and we ended up pivoting. I actually hate that word, but during COVID, we transitioned to doing a virtual open house, and in the end, we actually won one of the renowned awards, the John Cotton Dana, for the marketing and promotion that we did for that. So again, a silver lining. So some of the key learnings that Carl and I are going to talk about. So I think it was quite the ride. I think one of the key learnings is finalize the design before sharing renderings, and that came back to bite us with that Twittergate. We had quite consistently been sharing renderings, and the public doesn't forget that, and they hold you accountable to that. Why did the design change? You said you're going to do this. So that would be a strong, I think, a key learning that we made. That it's really important to have that strong business case, and that advocacy and that relationship building pays off to ensure that you're reputable and credible to those stakeholders. Community engagement. I think we had the support of our communities, our customers, council, and continually letting them be involved in the project in various ways was really important. We also conducted a fundraising feasibility study. So that's hiring an external professional group that goes out and determines what is your capacity to raise funds, and that was key. That functional program, do it ahead of time, not after the fact. So that would be another recommendation and a key learning. Realistic costings. We were so concerned about being prudent and conservative in our request to council, and I think we were a little too skinny on the ask. And I think don't settle. And then when you're doing renovations, expect the unexpected. Carl, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like I said, this building was it's larger than Calgary's, and it was built for a third of the budget. It would have been nice to have had half the budget. I would say it would have made quite a difference. But in the end, I think EPL, what you got was amazing for the money community. So, and all I can say is EPL is the best partner.
Well, that had to. We have a really good relationship with obviously Carl and the team at the City of Edmonton, which I think is the results you saw on the screen are just beautiful. People deserve beautiful architecture. So we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
So I hope you're all inspired by what they're doing in Edmonton. I hope we all don't move to Edmonton now that we've seen how wonderful their community is and the priority they're placing on design and their civic spaces. We're going to move into the facilitated discussion, Q&A. We've invited Leanne Croft, principal with 1080 Architecture here in Regina, and a wonderful partner for us here at Regina Downtown and the library here. She'll lead us through the Q&A, and I think maybe what we can do is just signal to you if we're seeing folks with their hands up, if you are unable to see them because you're focused elsewhere. But we also have some questions teed up as well. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand, and I think Hannah over here will come to you with a, okay, we'll just go straight there then. Looks like we have a question right away. So.
Thanks for the presentation, and I'm with Regina Food Bank. We also use 1080, which is great. So my question is, in Regina right now, we have the opportunity, but also the challenge of a lot of capital projects and requirements in our community, happening at a time of inflation and shrinking personal disposable income. So there's some angst, right, amongst sort of ratepayers and citizens. And so my question to you is, I think everyone here obviously sees a library and a new library in Regina as a social gathering place and pretty critical for our community. But when you went out and did your community consultation, how were you able to engage the business community, the cultural community, the sports and rec community, as you alluded to earlier, so there wasn't a bunch of different islands? Because right now we do have a lot of asks, and I think a lot of us see them opportunity for sort of collaboration in these projects, as opposed to sort of one-offs, which can be quite daunting. So I'm wondering if you found some success in that, and maybe some examples of how you were able to sort of have the conversation, as you alluded to, that libraries are more than just sort of books. There are all these wonderful things that you included. And were there some formal partners that you worked with collaboratively in that process?
That's a really good question. I think we had started a service framework that we called Community-Led Service Framework formally in 2009, and I think we work with over 300 community agencies across the city. So I think our librarians, our staff were very embedded in community, and I think it was easy for us to engage with different groups across the city because of those relationships that had been formed over many years before. I don't know, there isn't as much a competition between the library and other city services necessarily with community. I think maybe at council there is, and Carl can probably speak more to that. I think the library has a lot of civic pride, and we also position ourselves as working hand in glove with the city and being autonomous. So we're a bit separate, and I think maybe that's the reason why community doesn't necessarily see us, oh, we can only pay for taxes for, the rec center and not the library.
And the other thing I would say to that is that EPL obviously has proven their worth. So I think in the end, I think a lot of people do want to be associated with the libraries, like the senior center. They know that libraries are a sure thing, so let's get on top of them. so anyway, they got their seniors rec center as part of that library. And I know our city council has pushed us to do a lot more, looking at fire halls with affordable housing. And so we are looking at more things like that. I know the giant rec centers were part of that too, because Clairview, as an example, had 7 budgets in there. There was a completer school, there was a rec center, there was a library, there was a renovation to 2 arenas that were there was the parks, the artificial field there as well. So literally there were 7 budgets within that project, all in one building. Lately there's been a little bit of a pushback to some of these large mega complexes, because obviously our smaller downtown, like downtown rec centers, we're looking at renovating some of those and adding some more functionality to them. Yeah, no, it's
The other thing I think we had about 6 or 7 years where we didn't ask for increased operating dollars too. So I think what I talked about in terms of being really conscious about being good corporate citizens and asking only for what we need. And then, so as a result, in this last budget round for the 4-year budget, which our city is really strained for resources right now, they provided funding for 2 asks, but we hadn't asked for anything for about 8 years before that. And then in the last supplementary, we were the only organization that got increased dollars. So I think there's a lot of trust that what we're not just asking for frivolous things, it's important to the community. So and that's been built over years and years and years. So there's a trust there. And I think that motion was supported by all but 2 councillors.
And I mean, you look at the example too with Milner, why we didn't spend more money for Milner's. They didn't want to ask for much because they had already gotten 100 million for all those branches. So the feeling was like they had theirs and felt like we didn't want to ask for more. Although, you know, you get finished and they're like, oh, we haven't given you more. Oh, that's great. It's like, you could have come forward any time, you know.
Yes, I'd like to thank you so much for your presentation. Few comments or questions too. I mean, our library already has many wonderful spaces, not quite as many as you talked about in your new library, but we're sitting in one of them right now. The Film Theatre, there's also the Dunlop Art Gallery and the Prairie History Room, and so on. Regina's plan at the moment is to demolish this building and put up a new building, but there is no funding, and the city is really in trouble financially as far as I can gather from what I read and see. According to library figures, now these are a couple of years old, a new building would cost $125 million, whereas renovations, some of which are needed, a new boiler, new windows, or a new roof, I think is the other main one, that would only cost $25 million. Now, I'm terrified that this building is going to be demolished and there will be never any money to rebuild it. The plan now is to demolish it in September and move to a temporary space. I am so afraid of that happening. Do you have any advice? Thank you.
I mean, I think from what I've understood with the Regina Public Library, they've done the research on the building they have. They have done their hazardous material investigations. That being said, not everything gets uncovered, I'm sure, like any renovation. I mean, all I can say is that, like, I'm walking through the space, it has some really good spaces, but in a way, it's difficult looking at the different functions that you want to put in this building and how do you add to it. Like, the site is a very hemmed-in site. So either A, they find another site to build a new building, and then this building gets renovated into another use. That's, you know, something that I would see, because obviously it is an interesting building, and so it's definitely a building of its time. But in the end, you know, there's other sites around the downtown. I definitely think that a library needs to be in the downtown, because I think it adds to the vibrancy of downtown, and it services downtown. So I think that's very important. But yeah, no, that's what I would look at, you know.
It reminds me of when Carl was talking about our Highlands branch library, and the plan for that originally was to do a renovation, and then after further investigation and looking at how the failing mechanical systems, the infrastructure was not good at all. It was the return on investment. So looking at, you know, what would it cost and what would we get for a renovation, and what would it cost and what would we get for a complete new build. And so weighing those options, and I don't think the library would ever tear something down before they had a plan and assurance that there is funding to support those plans.
Okay. I don't know if you want to add anything more to that from an architectural perspective, Carol, in terms of, you know, what we see in terms of the building that we have here, downtown Regina's Public Library, compared to Milner, and maybe a bit of a compare and contrast there?
I mean, when I looked at Milner compared to this library, I find this library has a lot of windows. It does feel transparent. You do see what's happening. There is interplay between the floors, whereas Milner had none of that, right? It was definitely like, it was a black box, effectively. You know, so really, when we looked at renovating Milner, there was a few people that held on to the brutalist building, but for the most part, I think everybody was happy with the results that we ended up having. So, I mean, again, I'm sure that the research is being done here to look at salvaging the building, but in the end, if it's going to be too expensive to renovate it to build the library, then maybe it's better suited for something else than this.
Yeah, and the functionality, I think, when you're looking at that, maybe that's something, Pilar, if you want to comment on what that did for you in able to fully renovate that library, what you were able to give to the public space in that building.
Yes, and I think Carl always said all along the building has good bones, and I think that was perhaps another contrast with this particular building. And so it was much more cost effective to renovate and revitalize the space and still have the outcome of an excellent customer experience. I mean, you're always compromising, and there's a balance. We have fairly large pillars in the space, but we've made use of them and used them for signage and color branded pillars. So we've made the best of it, but the spaces are very customer oriented, and it's a very accessible space. It's very welcoming. I think people, it's kind of like Edmonton. Edmonton, I would say, is more blue collar, kind of regular folk, and unlike maybe Calgary, there's quite the contrast between the two libraries, and I think Calgary is absolutely stunningly beautiful. I'm not criticizing it. It might reflect, though, each of the characteristics of our city. Our mayor would say often that we built 10 libraries for the price of Calgary's one library, and that is probably more Edmonton kind of grassroots character.
Any other questions? So, one of the sources of community.
One of the sources of community pride is that visual inspiration that you get when you're able to have, whether it's a new building or a fully renovated building, and you see that a lot in what you were able to do in Edmonton, both at your branches and at the Central Library. When we talk about the times we're in right now where money is tight with cities, how do you, when you're talking to council, justify that? I know, Carol, you talked about how beautiful design is timeless, is sustainable. But when people are asking those hard questions about how you spend money, how do you justify that when you are faced with those questions?
I mean, really, in the end, I think I've said it to enough people that the important thing is really hiring the best designers to work with, because in the end, how to put it, if you hire I guess the best way to compare this is clothing. People get fashion really well. If you hire a not so good tailor, he'll have you buy the most expensive fabric to do whatever garment it is, and so he hopes it pulls off the garment. But if you go to an amazing designer, they'll do something with broadcloth that will fit you perfectly and timeless. And it's the same thing with architecture. I mean, if you hire somebody amazing, they know how to spend the money appropriately. Like when I look at Stephen Teeple and what he was able to do with the budget we had for a third the budget of Calgary's library, it's unreal what we did in that building for the third the budget. Considering we had to go in, asbestos removal, go in and put more bracing for seismic loads on the building. It was insane what had to be done to that building. And so again, not that I put too much faith in the designer, but hiring somebody amazing, you need to be creative on how to spend that small pot of money you have, because you're only going to get to do it once, and you want to do it right.
Do you have anything more to add to that one, Pilar?
I think it's tough. I think the shareholders for us at City Council and really demonstrating the value has been instrumental, I think, in that. And then our community, they really believe in the library. about just before the last budget cycle, we had actually reduced our budget, and the hue and cry, people are not happy when anything touches the library. So I think that has not been something that's happened overnight, though. It's the services that our staff provide each and every day that people really believe in the Edmonton Public Library, and so they want to champion that. And I think we are the only public institution left in our society. We welcome everybody from all walks of life, no matter what you wear, well, you might have to wear something, but no matter what your background is, where you come from, what your income is, you're all welcome with unconditional positive regard at the library. So I think really fulfilling that mandate and is been instrumental.
That's great. It leads actually well into the next question, which has to do with a perception sometimes that happens downtown, some of it being real, some not so much, that it's not safe, and that when you are having a public space that is so accessible downtown and you're making it bigger, it's just going to make that issue bigger. Is that something that you've dealt with in that location, and if so, how have you dealt with it?
Jeff, we've had lots of conversations about this as a Canadian Urban Libraries Council group. Yeah, this has been really challenging, and I think COVID has exacerbated an issue that was already percolating in public libraries across North America. And I think Mary Rowe describes in that report, Overdue, that Canada's urban libraries are the de facto triage centers for our community. Because of what I just said about being welcoming to all, that's the most beautiful thing about the public libraries, that we're welcoming to all. It's also the most challenging thing about public libraries, is that we're welcoming to all. And Edmonton had in 2022, we had almost 100 opioid poisonings in our spaces. That is just, that should not be happening in a public library. So I think we mirror what is happening in our society. I think we've seen definitely over the last 3 years an evolution as more and more people come downtown and use the library and use our downtown. It becomes more safe, and that's what we need. We need more people downtown, and we are gradually, it's going to take some time in Edmonton, seeing that. And I think the library is one of the draws downtown. We are still, as I said, the most visited place downtown. So I think that will come over time. And it's when you think about the incidents that happen, it represents less than 0.02% of our overall visits. And I'm not diminishing that, because I think it can be very difficult for staff. However, when you put that into perspective, overall, we have very few interactions that result in unsafe conditions.
I think you've talked a lot about the successes, and the fact that it is the most visited place downtown, I think, speaks volumes. Has there been other business success that has been a result of the rejuvenation of the Milner Library?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we're clearly a draw, so I think, and I don't know what economic studies have been done in other areas of North America to demonstrate, but I know that an advocacy package that the American Library Association did a few years ago indicated that houses or neighborhoods that had public libraries were higher in value than those without. So that doesn't directly answer your question. I'm sure there's some research out there, and Carl, I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
In terms of our downtown, it's been, if you haven't been, it looks like a war zone, but in a way though, the one part of downtown that's worked out really well, or stayed really good, Bryce Howard Way, is right next to the library, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it. It was good before COVID, but it's still good now, you know what I mean? And so hopefully the library helped with that. It's probably one of the, like, I walk a lot downtown, it's probably one of the most popular area around downtown, and that's along that space.
Okay, we've got a question from the floor.
Hi. Yeah, I had a question about, you said about building a solid business case and the investment that was put into gathering really good data, not just for that business case, but community engagement. Can you talk a little bit about that investment that was made to get really good, solid information to go to the community with, to show that this was a good spend of public money?
That's a good question. I don't think we didn't rally the community around the budget support. What we rallied the community around was the need, and what did they envision for a new space and a revitalized, and it was incredible. So and we also didn't just do it at the Downtown Central Library at Milner, we did it across the system. So we did a democracy process, and folks would write down ideas for kids they were drawing. We did some, we actually called it, I was just looking back, Think Tank, which was one of the names that Milner was named during that fiasco about Twitter.
And in French it was the bibliothèque.
Yes, bibliothèque, yeah. So we called it the Think Tank, so we invited community leaders. So I think, and that took 8 months. So we spent the time and we listened, we reported back. We said, this is what we heard. So I think that sort of confirming, yes, this is what we heard, I think that really helped. And then the champions like Mr. Milner, he was a big champion in the business community, and getting champions for fundraising. Those are some of the things that I can think of off the top of my head. It's a really good question. Does that help?
It also got compared to a Imperial Star Destroyer.
Hi, I have two questions. And one is, could you please comment on the design of the behind spaces, the spaces for functionality, for staff, for collections, for things like that. Also, you said you had a hiring freeze before you went into this. Did you have to expand your staff afterwards? I'm looking at that beautiful kitchen and all those people in it, and I'm thinking somebody has to come in afterwards and be hired to clean an industrial space like that up. So I'm wondering about staffing levels and the functionality, and whether that was another feature, well, another budget that had to be expanded there.
That's a really good question, and I would say no. And we, obviously, staff were a key stakeholder in the process. The staff spaces are very functional, and I think it might have, staff were very pleased with the space, and it could have something to do with how poor they were before. They were very cramped. As Carl mentioned, we had tiny, if you were lucky, you would have a slit of a window. So you know how important natural light is to people who are in a space for 8 hours a day or more. So I think staff felt really heard. They were very much involved in the layout of their spaces, so that was key. People commit to that which they're involved. So I think the staff spaces actually are work really, really well. We committed to fewer offices, so that right to light too, so everybody has natural light, so that also was a win. Yes, staff were participated and contributed to the furniture selection, so engaging staff in that. In terms of staffing levels, we've been really conscious actually for years. We do something called an activity per FTE, so we're constantly looking at ways to reallocate staff. So when a service may be not performing or a branch is not as active, we will move positions to a branch that is more active. When we redid Milner, there were some areas that needed less staff, so we were able to kind of move. It was like Tetris a little bit to move things around. I think that the key, we had a lot of savings with that hiring freeze, and we just didn't need, we needed about a third of the staff in the temp space, as we had it in the original Milner, and then those staff went out to branches, which actually, it was a great way for, the unintended consequence of that was that staff who hadn't worked with children before, who were mainly in the adult area, and were now working with children, sometimes reluctantly, but at the end of the day wanted to stay at that branch because they were really happy about that. So it really was a way to build that system, that one library. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
The other thing too, with the building became way more open, and there was a lot more. It was more open from a visibility, because back the original library had very, very high stacks. So now the stacks went a lot lower. There was openings between the floors, so you could actually see what was happening. I think so. That's really helped from a surveillance point of view type thing, and where the librarians are in terms of access and support, it's very clear on all the floors. So again, it's instead of having one mammoth desk on the main floor, now there's like 3 desks throughout. So.
One of the comments that's come up, a perception that with so much of a move to digital media and a reduction in print material, why are public libraries getting bigger? Speak a little bit on that one.
So we didn't increase our space much, as I mentioned, so I think we just allocate our space differently, and I think I have to give a shout out to books. Books, whenever we do customer feedback, satisfaction surveys, non-customers, books still are our most used service. They really still are used, despite the fact that there is a drop in circulation. They're still really a core of our business. I think it's just looking at space differently. There's a lot higher need for study, quiet space, and so more reallocating those spaces, and then providing spaces for things like specialized computers so people can edit music or a podcast that they just recorded in the sound booth.
So redistribution.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, 15,000 square feet isn't really much. And I think we have the space that we need. I don't think we need more space, but really that's a pretty minimal increase for a significant revitalization.
Would you say it's the same for the branches? Do they stay similar?
The branches, no. The branches, we have a standard size now of 15,000 square feet, so those branches were crammed. Yeah. The other thing with Milner is that we didn't lease, the city was using the 5th floor, so we reclaimed that back, so we did get that additional space.
Yeah, and that's for the use. I think, again, what I had talked about them being the church for the secular, you're seeing a lot more people using the library as a third place. You know what I mean? They don't want to sit at work, they don't want to be in their smaller apartments, so then they meet up and go to libraries. So we're seeing a lot more people going and hanging out at a library, reading, computer use at the library too, and they're just doing stuff at the library and being around the people.
I guess my question centers around people with disabilities. I know with the addition of the ramp and all that seems nice, but I'm just wondering, in the sense of the rest of the facility, I noticed you talked about, digital labs and maker spaces and all that. Well, I'm not necessarily wanting to put a downer on that, but probably 80% of the people with disabilities can't use that stuff. And so I'm just wondering how you'd modified or changed how you set things up and how you programmed it so that those with varying disabilities were able to use the space.
I think we do all kinds of things to serve folks with disabilities. We have actually volunteers and staff now do it, to go out and bring materials to people's homes who are unable to get to the library. There are people with disabilities who use the makerspace, and there's staff support for that. We have various partnerships with organizations that serve folks who are experiencing disabilities. There are groups who come and spend time in Milner, folks who are disabled with these organizations, and they do conversation circles. So it is actually well used. I think the biggest improvement at Milner has been the physical access. In the past we had a lift that would often be inoperable, so folks would have to go around, or people would be stuck on a wheelchair trying to get into the building. A mom with 2 kids in a stroller would be climbing the stairs. So I think that physical access throughout the space is vastly improved. I think we can always do better in that area. I've forgotten the name with the sensory. We're now doing work with organizations for people who have sensory challenges. So it's a constant connecting with community, finding out what they can need and what we can do. We have hearing loops throughout the space. So for those who are hearing impaired, so there are a number of things I think that we've done across the system to serve, and we continually look to doing better.
And some of the other things, all the washrooms were all renovated. We had gender-neutral washrooms as well. Yeah, way more accessibility. Again, on the main floor, like I said, you can access now. Let's say if before we had like 6 lineal feet of grade access, now you have easily, 25 to 30 feet of access at grade now for the building, which is a lot. Like it's 10 times what we used to have. So.
I love the Indigenous space that you created and the engagement that took place to hear communities speaking about the importance of seeing themselves reflected in culture and having a space that they felt comfortable and welcome. Can you speak to the level of engagement and the impact that's had with Indigenous communities and some of the things that you've done to build those relationships?
Yeah, and I think that's been a work in progress. We started with, at that time it was called an Aboriginal Services Librarian in 2007. So it's been building on that process, and we did a report that was how we could do, basically what we needed to do differently in serving Indigenous communities. So that was back in 2007. And continually building on that with our community librarians who work with various groups. We did a lot of relationship building and work with Indigenous communities throughout the Milner project. Before we closed, we held a ceremony to help guide us in the closure and the reopening that involved a number of elders in the community as we planned Piasuwaskagan. We actually redesigned it so the interior has wood birch that is very much from Alberta. It's something natural to Alberta and the Cree Nation. So that was something that was recommended. The ways the doors faced were changed. The colors. So we really adapted and modified based on that consultation, that engagement. And that when we reopened, we held a ceremony actually to name the space that included Willie Littlechild, who was one of the commissioners for the TRC, who lives near Edmonton. So there was numerous consultation and focus groups throughout, and that continues. We've got an elder in residence. We had an elder when we were in the temporary space, and then have had an elder now. It's going on 3 years, and she works with community. She conducts all kinds of classes, some virtual. We have pre-language classes that are oversubscribed to. They're very popular. We also do things in the kitchen, as I mentioned, with Indigenous communities. So it's an ongoing process, but it definitely impacted that design of that space and how the space is used. The service plan was also influenced by that engagement.
Before you start, we do have 10 minutes left for our time together. So maybe 2 more questions, and then we can wrap up. Is that okay? Thank you.
Awesome. I just snuck right in. I'm a local designer here, and I thought it was really interesting how the renderings, releasing the renderings and the visuals around the project were received, and how it potentially impacted how it was.
Project for this one, sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. How the project was ultimately received, potentially. I'm curious what lessons were learned for future community engagement, and how you develop design and be authentic about representing the projects and having it as engaging as possible, that community feedback, now that you've been through this.
That's a tough one. In that, you're always wanting, like Pilar said, you're always wanting to share the latest and greatest of where you're going, right? And so at the time, that's where we were at, right? And then so, but in the end, I guess the last rendering we had was very similar to what we ended up building. It's just when people were taking the pictures of it, it was half finished. The lights weren't on. It's dark. I mean, of course, it looks like unfinished because it is unfinished, right? And so people's reactions to that, and the fact that it was gray, and you're like, yes, but it's zinc. It's not just gray finished paint. And people, like I said, and people like to pile on social media, right? So somebody picks at it, and then all of a sudden everybody's on top of it. But that being said, there was a lot of really fun memes that happened during that time about the buildings. It was like, well, you have to, like you said, like Pilar said, you just have to embrace it and roll with it, because if you start fighting every person that says something bad about it, you know what I mean? And of course, you sit there years later now walking in, and I'm walking behind people going, that building looks really good. Like, it looks so, I don't know what people were talking about. Well, that's what you get, right? So I don't know if I would do it differently, because I think in the end, you're always wanting to share the latest and greatest. We're currently working with Omar Gandhi on the new Riverbend Library. That's something that we didn't show, and he's posted it on social media. And again, I mean, the big issue I had on that one is now we're doing a design and having it sit for 3 years. Well, God help you if you're going to be able to afford what we showed them then, right? So but the reality is, like I said, it's you always hire amazing people that will hopefully rise to the occasion and do something amazing. So yeah, I guess it would have been nice to have had half the budget, but it was what it was.
I think it's a really interesting question. I think what we learned about engagement was in our efforts to be transparent and provide regular updates, we shared designs that weren't finalized. So that would be, I think that was, because then people went back because these designs had been communicated, and they went, well, what was going on? Why did it start here? And I think people don't necessarily have an understanding of the evolution of a project. And so for me, my learning is we will not be putting out publicly a rendering until we're pretty certain that that's where we're going. And I think there is the Edmonton has the Edmonton Design Committee, and Carl, did you want to talk about that and their role in looking at the design? So that is a part of the consultation process.
Yeah, like I said, originally, like the City Council put together the Edmonton Design Committee, so all city projects have to go to the EDC for review. So they have to look at it from a urban design point of view, and how the building fits within the site. So we had gone to them. The only thing I find sometimes difficult with EDC is they don't necessarily respect that your budget line ends here, like on the sidewalk. They think you're the city, so like improve everything. And you're like, well, our budget is for this building, not for the whole street and across the street and on and on. So we did go to EDC for that building, and again, it received support in the end. But yeah, no, it's difficult, because part of showing the renderings is also getting excitement and trying to fundraise, right? And so what do? I guess you sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. You need to show something to raise money.
Maybe put a big draft on it.
Exactly. But I mean, people forget the last rendering, because it obviously was very similar to what it was. But again, it did go through a lot of iteration. And I guess the more years it takes, the more renderings you're going to see at that rate. That's why I guess you could try to scrub the internet, before you.
One more question?
Yeah.
Thanks. You folks have obviously worked on many cool libraries, and I was wondering if you had any favorite kind of hybrid spaces. You had mentioned the senior center one. Did you have, or it doesn't necessarily need to be a project that you've worked on in Edmonton, but just in the library, the greater world library community, do you have any, favorite hybrid kind of buildings?
That's sort of tough too. Within our own libraries, it's like, they're all my children. I love them all equally, Although I do have, like I said, Jasper Place, I remember, honestly, that was our first library. That was like, blew our socks off, and we were like, wait. I still remember being with the architect, Gene Dove, standing under that shell, and he was like, oh my God, I can't believe we effing built this, you know what I mean? Because he never would have thought, back before my time, we would have ever built something that outlandish in terms of doing this concrete shell. It would have been a box, you know what I mean? And that's that, you know, covered in stucco for the most part. So again, so that was one that I thought was really interesting. Getting to work with the Pack Cows, again, super interesting. Stephen Teeple. It's a lot of the relationships you get to meet these architects on these projects, and I find that the takeaway from that is really interesting. But I do find it amazing when you go to the grand opening and you see young kids, 7-year-old boys talking about buildings. You know, they don't talk about buildings, you know, and for them to go like, you know, they're running out of the building and yelling at me, this building's amazing, you know, and they don't know who I am, you know, so, I mean, it feels good because that's who you're doing it for, really, and part of it is actually just creating that aspiration and inspiration for the people who frequent these facilities, right, so it's, they go there and they're inspired, that's what I you know, and everybody takes something different away from them, but that's the important thing from my point of view.
I mean, I was going to use that phrase that I love all my children, so all my branches. I think about, is Trevor Brody the architect?
Trevor
Bodie. People still, we probably forever haunted by those tweets, because anytime Milner comes up on social media, there's inevitably some negative comments, and I think so we've sort of been branded with that experience. And he made the comment that it is evoking a reaction, and that is what its job is, that good architecture is evoking something in people, and whether it could be positive, it might be negative, and that is what it's supposed to achieve. So I think about his comments frequently in that regard, but yeah, I think our branches all have something different. There are people who don't like Jasper Place, there are people who don't like Highlands, there are people who don't, so it really is what resonates with the individual, and I think what's meaningful for me is to see folks use the space and that they're getting what they need when they come to the library.
I was going to say, if you do want to read an interesting library article, Trevor Bodie wrote one in the paper at the time Milner was getting slagged, and it was called A Tale of Two Libraries. So it's actually comparing and contrasting Edmonton's library and Calgary's library. And it was a very insightful article about the two, so again, not that I'm in competition.
I have one more question. I think over the course of your time with the city of Edmonton has become a real patron of excellent architecture and has elevated the expectation of design in the city. Can you speak a little bit about how you've seen that evolution, and was it an easy thing to do when you were pitching that first idea, or like a little bit, because it's over your time there, there's been an evolution.
It's sort of wild because at the time I had no profile, so it's amazing what you can get away with when you have no profile and people don't know what's going on. So you do this stuff, people go like, well, who did you ask? I didn't ask anybody, I just didn't break any laws, you know? I mean, you talk to procurement, they said you have to be out front of how you're gonna calculate the fee. Okay, fine, we'll do that, you know? So we're like, everything about it was sort of under the radar, right? You just did your homework to make sure that you're asking for an adequate amount of money. And then you do a lot of research to find out who is doing the best work in those fields, like libraries, rec centers. And you know what I mean? I won't admit it to anybody in Edmonton, but I find a quiet room and I phone all these people and I tell them, look, this is coming out, you know what I mean? So you should look at it, right? And then then people find out about the whole fee thing, that you're paying full fee. I mean, what would you rather do as an amazing architect? Do work in your own city for like a third or a quarter of the fee for somebody who's going to force you to do something that you don't enjoy, or an inspired client who wants you to do your best work and is going to pay you, you know, the fair wage. So it's been pretty exciting. There was some negative reaction at some point when there was a councillor who was talking about our rec centers being Taj Mahals. He was running for mayor at the time, but it was amazing to see the reaction of the public. This is what we want our tax dollars paying for. These aren't Taj Mahal. These are places we use and enjoy. And so it's really, it's great to see people, and it's always when you go to the grand opening of these facilities and you see people like losing their minds in these facilities and getting high fives from the counselors, and they're just like, it's exciting, you know, and in the end, they pay their taxes and they want to see a value rendered for those taxes, and so this is our places that they take their kids, and you know what I mean, and I look at it this way, you know, if we always just build concrete boxes, what are we going to say about, you know, the 2020s that, you know what I mean, this is the best we could do, you know what I mean, and you see all these different decades of people that are trying to do their best buildings and leave a mark for the citizens, and so that's what I think we're trying to do, so yeah.
It's been fantastic to watch what you've been doing in Edmonton, and I think, you know, it's really visible, the transformation that's happened, so kudos to you.
Thanks. And I welcome anybody who wants to come and do a tour. Come to Edmonton. You can go 311 and ask for the city architect, and he'll patch you through and we'll drive you around. So it's okay. And I think we had our email addresses on the presentation, but feel free to ask. It's like I said, we're definitely there to answer any questions. If you need any help, I will furnish our RFQ and RFP to anybody who asks.
Thank you very much, both of you, for coming today and speaking about all of the things that you've been doing in Edmonton, and especially the lessons learned. I think that's really beneficial for us to be able to hear that piece as well. Thank you.